Welcome to the Bearcats Den with President Taylor. I'm Dr. Ivy Taylor, your host and president of Rusk College. For today's show, our guest is our new Vice President for Enrollment Management, Dr. Jason Johnson. Welcome, Dr. Johnson.
Hey, thank you for having me.
We have been eagerly anticipating your arrival here at Rusk College. You've been on the job for how many weeks now?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
2 weeks and 2 days. Yeah.
Well, welcome to Mississippi.
Thank you.
I know you came here from Langston University, but before you tell us a little bit about Oklahoma, tell us about where you originate your life's journey.
Well, I'm originally from Honey Grove, Texas, a little small town in northeast Texas, about an hour and a half from Dallas. Not very big at all, maybe about 1,500 people.
Wow, very small.
Yeah, and that's on a good year. So it's a small town. I grew up the youngest of 10 kids, 8 sisters, 1 brother, and I, of course, was the baby. So I'm the one that got experimented on when everything was taking place.
So was your family in agriculture?
So we did have, well, I would say we grew up on a farm, but it wasn't really a large farm, at least to us in Texas. My dad, we had about 30 head of cattle, around 50 to 75 hogs, chickens, and then we grew a little bit of a garden and everything. So I grew up, tending to the cows and the hogs and everything. So
as a young boy growing up in Texas, what did you imagine that your career path was going to be?
It's definitely not the path that I'm on. I really never really thought about college or anything like that at all growing up. It was kind of like graduate high school and then find a job at the local factory. But a couple of things that were really interesting happened to me when I was young. One, me and my brother one day, my dad had us out working with the cows and we were getting ready to sell one of the bulls. And we were trying to get it in the chute. And if you've ever worked with cattle and everything, there's this little chute that you have to get the bull in to get it on the trailer. My brother told me, hey, I'm gonna go to the front and pull on him. You go to the back and push on him and we'll get him on the trailer. So when I woke up, I was at home and I apparently had been knocked out.
Oh my goodness.
The bull had kicked me and it knocked me out and I was out for like 3 or 4 hours. So that kind of got me thinking, I don't know if I want to do this whole farming thing much more. But then also there was a group that used to come from Dallas, Texas. It was called the King Kids. And there was a lady who used to live in Honey Grove, grew up in Honey Grove. She started it in Dallas and she would always bring those kids back to Honey Grove so that they would get a chance to see things outside of their block. They grew up in inner city Dallas. All of them lived in low income housing. So she would bring them to the country so that they could see how country kids live, and then also occasionally take us to Dallas so that we could see how inner city kids would live. But one of the things that she really did with that program is that she brought in different professors at universities and things to talk to us about going to college and pursuing other avenues other than what we're seeing and growing up in. So it was really interesting because those two things kind of sparked me saying, okay, maybe I can do something different with my life.
Did any of your siblings go to college?
No, I was the first person in my family to go to college, and after I graduated, a couple of my siblings went back and 2 of my siblings have gotten bachelor's degrees and 2 have gotten associate degrees.
Oh, that's wonderful. So the woman from the King's Kids got you interested in a different path. So then what college did you end up going to and how did you end up there?
Okay, so that is a very interesting story. So going into my freshman year in high school, so 2 things happened. One, a friend of mine that I was really close with, he was killed in a car accident. Then later on, another friend I had grown up with since birth, he was arrested for an armed robbery. He hung out with some of our older cousins and older friends, and they broke into a house and they had a firearm on him, and he was charged as an adult.
Wow.
15 years old, he was charged as an adult in Texas. So of course I started seeing those things taking place, and I was like, I don't really want this to be my life. And there was a lady who came from Texas A&M Commerce. At the time it used to be called East Texas State University, and she was in the Upper Bound program. So she was trying to recruit all of us to go to college. And I was sitting there and I was making all kind of noise, knocking things on the floor, because I'm like, you have this white lady coming to talk to me about going to college, and no one that I know has ever gone to college. The people that went to college didn't look like me. That was my perception. So at the end of the class, I got up and walked out of the back of the classroom because I didn't want to walk by her because it was kind of embarrassing how I acted. But I was just like, you're selling me a pipe dream that there's no one who looked like me that go to college. So then, after those two things happened, I was actually sitting in one of my classes and I got kicked out of class. I went to the library instead of going to the principal's office because I figured if I went to the principal's office, they were going to send me home, and I didn't want my parents to know that because, my dad was a little tough. So I walked in the library and I told the librarian I was there to do a research project on colleges. And she said, okay, well, here's the book. And she gave me this big, thick book of all the colleges. So I went through and I looked at all these different colleges, and I was picking colleges based on their colors. I picked colleges in New York because I was like, I've never been to New York, and New York City is supposed to be this magnificent place. And I ended up writing about 200 colleges, and I was like, hey, I'm a little kid from Texas. I can play a little football. Can y'all come and really, talk to me about going to college? Out of those colleges that I had written, about 75 or so actually sent me letters back, and they asked about my grades. They asked about the ACT score, and I told you on the ACT score, I told them I made a 96. Because for me, I didn't know anything about the ACT, but I told them if I made 100, they think I'm perfect. But in the 96 is a high A, but not a perfect score. And then they asked me for a letter of recommendation. So I actually went to the teacher that had kicked me out of class and told her what I had done. And of course she was mad, but she said, you know what? If you come and you clean up my classroom every day for the next month, I'll write you those letters. So every day I was there cleaning up her classroom, washing down the blackboard, the chalkboard and everything. And she sent me those letters, and I ended up sending them back to the schools. And out of that, I probably had about 50 schools that started contacting me and recruiting me. And I ended up taking 5 official visits, and I ended up signing with Oklahoma State on a full athletic scholarship. So that's kind of how I got to college. And part of the reason I had actually chosen Oklahoma State is because another interesting story. The head coach at the time was Bob Simmons. And on the last day of your recruiting visit, he meets with all the recruits himself. Just a one-on-one conversation. So prior to that, I hadn't met him at all. Hadn't seen him, didn't know who he was. And I walk into this room, and it's this long conference table. My chair was on one end, his chair was on the other end. So I'm sitting there just nervous, like when the coach is gonna come out. He comes out, he opens the door, and he has on this dark charcoal gray suit and a black turtleneck. And he walks out, and I'll never forget it. He was like, hello, Jason. My name is Bob Simmons, and I want you to play football for me. I didn't hear anything else he said after that. I was like, who is this black man that's coming out like the Godfather with this suit on? It was over at that point. I didn't hear anything that he said after that.
It's like that movie, You Had Me at Hello.
Yeah, so it was that. And when I walked out of the room, I was like, okay, this is where I'm going. And on the ride home, my parents were like, well, what do you think? Are you going to go here, or are you going to go to Texas Tech, or are you going to go to Texas? And I was like, well, I'm going to go to Oklahoma State. And my mother was like, great, and she pulled out this bag of all these sweatshirts and all that stuff. So that was my journey to college.
So seeing that coach, someone who looked like you in that position, that made a big impact on you.
It did. It was the first time I seen someone that looked like me in a high-level position like that, and I knew at that point that he was going to be able to help me to get to where I'm supposed to go. It wasn't just about going to the NFL, even though that was a dream. It was about what will be my plan B, and I knew that he was either going to get me to plan A or get me to plan B, and I knew it wasn't going to be one of those things that he was going to let me skirt along just so that we could win games, that he was going to be intense and really push me to be great.
And so what was the academic experience like?
Okay, so, I'm a first generation student. So with that being said, everyone in my class that came in with me, they had already pre-enrolled. I had no idea about getting pre-enrolled or anything like that. So I actually got enrolled for classes the day before we were scheduled to start classes, and it just so happened we had a meeting, and they asked who all had their schedules. They wanted to see their schedules, and I was sitting there like, I don't know what's going on. What am I supposed to do? So at that point, they took me to an academic advisor to get me enrolled. So I pretty much had a lot of 7:30 classes. So I was going from getting up at 4 in the morning to go to work out and do all the conditioning, going directly to class. So it was a real big adjustment, and I struggled. Just not only with the academic parts of having to get myself to class and running across campus to get to classes, but it was also just the whole college lingo, talking about the bursar's office, talking about the registrar's office. I didn't know any of those things, and when I would call home and talk to my parents, they were like, well, we can't really help you. Yeah. You're gonna have to figure this thing out yourself. We can support you in other ways, but we can't really help you with that part of your journey. So at the end of my first semester, I had a 1.7 GPA.
Oh my goodness.
And it was interesting that we were actually in San Antonio getting ready to play on a bowl game, and they sent a letter home to my parents, and my mother had opened it, and it said that you were being placed on academic notice, and she and I was on the payphone, and I was like, okay, it's a lot of static, I can't hear you, I'll have to talk to you later. And I hung up the phone. But then when I got home after the game, she was like, well, what is this? What's going on? And just like, I'm struggling a little bit. So luckily the next semester I met some people that really helped me transition and provided me support. Yeah. The next semester I actually ended up with a 2.6 GPA. So it brought my GPA up above a 2.0.
So obviously you were able to find support and persist and graduate.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'd like to hear about the rest of your educational journey and how you got into enrollment management and your plans for Rusk College.
Great, thank you.
We'll take a short break. Please enjoy the selection from the world-renowned Rusk College a cappella choir under the direction of Dr. Arlandra Harvey.
The world is full of colleges, but there's one that is my own. For it stood for education when it had to stand alone. Russ was first to give some learning unto those who were set free. Of all the schools in all the world, Russ is the one for me. College mine, mine, mine. Oh, Russ is mine, mine, mine. The alumni and the students are so proud to be called thine. There is none like you, oh royal white and blue. College mine, so divine. College mine, mine, mine.
Welcome back to the Bearcats Den with President Taylor. I'm Dr. Ivy Taylor, your host and president of Rusk College. Our guest for today's show is Dr. Jason Johnson, Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Rusk College. So Dr. Johnson, you successfully completed your education at Oklahoma State. So then how did you end up in your career in higher ed?
So I really think that higher ed kind of chose me. So once I graduated from undergrad, I spent some time trying to find a job. It took me about 3 to 4 months before I was really actually able to find a job. And I wanted to start out actually going into pharmaceutical sales. And I had a rep that I knew, and he told me I didn't have any experience because my whole career was based on football and then going to school. I didn't get a chance to do any kind of internships or anything like that to develop those skills.
Yes.
So he connected me with his friend that actually worked at AT&T to do business-to-business sales. And I did business-to-business sales for AT&T for a year and absolutely hated it. It was like the worst thing. The money was good, but it was so boring to go into these places trying to sell people on things that they already knew that they wanted, but they wanted to see if you could convince them to go ahead and purchase it. So I absolutely hated it. But during the same time, I started doing some volunteer coaching at one of the local high schools. And while I was there was a lot of kids talking about, oh, I want to go to the league, I want to go to the NFL, I want to go to the NBA. And I was like, okay, well, how are you going to get there? And every one of them was like, well, I don't know, but that's what I'm going to do. And I was like, okay, well, let me tell you the steps on how to get there. So what I started doing is not only going to practice with them, I started going to classes on my days off so that I could see how their grades were, how they were interacting with their teachers and everything. And I realized a lot of those kids didn't have the educational background to really get them in college. Therefore, to think about getting a scholarship to go to college to get to the NFL or the NBA, it's like you're backing yourself in the corner. But at the same time, it was kind of eye-opening that so many of these students' dreams were to get to the NFL and to the NBA, and they didn't have a plan B or any other outlet of where they would go. And I happened to run into a guy that worked in educational talent search, which is another one of the TRIO programs similar to Upper Bound. And he asked me, did I want a job? And I told him, I kind of got a job. I'm trying to go into pharmaceutical sales. And he was like, oh, no, you're going to hate that. and I was like, yeah, I do kind of hate it. So he gave me a job as a counselor to go out to those schools and recruit and work with students to help them get their things in order so that they could go to college. So ultimately, a lot of those kids that I was doing volunteer coaching with, in this new job, I was going and working with them and helping them, study for the ACT, making sure that they're taking the right core courses that they need to be academically eligible to go to college. And I just fell in love with it because it was an opportunity for me to help students that were similar to me growing up. So it was kind of like higher ed kind of chose me.
Okay, well, what a great place to start, that you were actually, on the ground helping students to be able to matriculate to college. So you worked your way up and have ascended to leadership in enrollment management. And so we're glad to welcome you here to Rusk College. Share with us some of your thoughts about where we are as an institution, or what your impressions were about Rusk when you arrived here.
So I was pleasantly surprised when I first arrived here. When I came out on the trip, there were some things that I think that God kind of aligned the pathway for me. When I was flying out, I said a quick prayer, and when I landed in the airport and I was walking through the airport, there was a song that was playing. And I couldn't really hear it at first, but then when I got out where the rental car area was, I could really hear it. And it was one of my mother's favorite songs. And I was like, okay, God, you giving me some signs now, I can see it. And then when I was driving in and I pulled into the town, I was like, oh, this reminds me of my hometown and where I grew up at. And seeing the town square, I was like, oh yes, this is just like home. And it just had a hometown feeling. But then when I came to campus, I actually walked around when there weren't a lot of people on campus. Everybody was kind of, going home. And just got a feel for it. And I could feel that this was a place of potential, a place of growth. And that was what really pushed me, like, okay, we can do some things here at the institution.
So what are some of the things that you would like to do for those who are listening and want to assist Russ achieve, our enrollment goals, or curious about what's happening here? What would you like to share?
Well, I think that, first and foremost, we're going to redesign our enrollment process of not only how we onboard students, but actually how we recruit students. We're going to expand what we are now, calling Mississippi's oldest, most prestigious HBCU. We believe that there's a reach that the institution has, and we're going to look at expanding that reach. We're going to look at moving west, going into Texas, going into Oklahoma, going into Colorado, places where we know that there's growing black populations, but not a strong HBCU presence. We believe that we have what, the course offerings, we're looking at expanding those, the majors, we're looking at expanding those, and we believe we can be attractive to a lot of students that are out west that want an HBCU experience.
I know that over the last few years, the number of students from Marshall County and Holly Springs attending Russ has declined for a variety of reasons. But what would you say for those who are in our own backyard here as far as our strategy and approach to creating a pipeline of students from the neighboring counties?
Well, we want them to understand that we know this is home, but we want you to stay home. We want you to be a part of the institution. And I think that when it comes to those students that are in Marshall County, I think there may be some belief that, oh, they're going to come because we're right here. And we may have neglected them a little bit, didn't show them the love and the nurturing that they wanted. And we're going to restore that. We're going to make sure that we're going and having those conversations with the counselors at those schools. We're going to make sure that we're bringing those students to campus. Because even though they're in Marshall County and may be close to campus, they may not come to campus. So we want them to come to campus, develop that comfort, and let them know that this is the place for you. You're going to be close to home while you're at home.
Wonderful. So what are some of the things that you learned from your early experiences helping students on the ground and your own observations about high schools, you know, just about the process for young black students that want to go to college?
Well, one of the things that I really learned is that our students, our community is extremely relational, that we have to go in and develop relationships with the counselors, the principals, the lunch ladies, the janitorial staff. We have to develop those relationships with those people because they're going to be heavily influential on the decisions that the students make because they're going to have those conversations and they're going to really push students towards certain schools. Not just that, with the students themselves. If they don't feel like they have a comfort with someone at the institution, that if I go to that institution, I know I can walk into Dr. Johnson's office, you know, they're not going to want to be at that institution. And ultimately for students, it's about choosing where they're comfortable with. You know, most of the institutions are really good at educating students, but do we provide the other things that they're looking for? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel nurtured? Do they feel like we're going to be able to push them to grow? And we're here at the institution, we have that ability to do those things, to nurture the students, to provide them that comfort, and being able to walk in and have conversations with professionals and not have to wait in long lines.
I understand that you already made some time to go over to Holly High.
I did. One day after work, I just kind of drove by and stopped and got out to watch some of the football practice and everything. And it was real interesting because people were looking like, who is this big guy walking across the field? And I think maybe the coaches may have thought I was a little bit younger than what I was when I walked up, and may have thought they had a guy that they could put on the line.
So one of the things that's been an interesting development in higher ed has just been the focus on diversity. And at HBCUs, we've been doing that since our creation. We have more diverse faculty than most other higher education institutions, and obviously we focus on serving a disadvantaged population. There's been a growing Latino population in Tennessee and in Mississippi. Will you talk about how we will make Russ a welcoming place for our different types of groups?
Yeah, and I think that, as you mentioned, HBCUs have always been the most diverse institutions, you know, that the U.S. has had. So that's just been the history of our institutions. And also by us hiring a multicultural admissions advisor who's going to help with us some of the marketing and reaching out to those populations, I think that's just another avenue for us to show students that we want you on campus, we are understanding your needs, we're understanding your wants, and we're trying to meet you where you are.
And so once we get the students here, we want to keep them here. So will you talk a little bit about retention? What have you learned about retention during the course of your professional career?
So again, with our students, because they're so highly relational, we want to make sure that they have connections with, you know, faculty, with staff, the administrators, but then also other student groups that'll get them involved on campus. One of the things that we really want to look at is our first year experience, expanding it and having more activities that students really want and want to be a part of. And one thing that I'm really hoping that we're going to do, and I'm a big proponent of, is developing our study abroad programs, of giving students the opportunity to not only come to Russ and see Mississippi and Tennessee, but also travel the world and see other parts of what we have to offer. And I think that we're capable of doing those things.
Yes, I'm also excited about the idea giving students opportunity to study abroad once we kind of get past COVID.
Yeah, COVID.
Yes, I think it will be important for them to get their passports early on. I never had a passport till I was about 40, because prior to that I traveled to Mexico and Canada, and you didn't need a passport back then. But yeah, we want our students, since we want our students to be prepared for excellence in service in their communities and throughout the world, that means we have to give them a chance to see the world. So, Dr. Johnson, it sounds like you are well prepared and positioned and full of ideas to be able to help us make some of our dreams for our students here come true.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Welcome to the Bearcat family. We're excited to have you.
I'm happy to be a part of the family.
Wonderful. That's it for this episode of Bearcats Den. Thanks so much for tuning in.